our jurors to teach for Flora Fauna. I want to give a big round of applause to Dr. David Berry, who's during the show. For those of you that don't know, Dr. Berry is the chief curator over at Selby Gardens. So Flora and Fauna is definitely up his alley.
Thank you all for coming. This was a great pleasure to work with the Art Center on the show and to select the works that you see on display. There were a very large number of submissions, or at least from my perspective, there were
482.
Yes, which is great, and I think not only reflects the community's enthusiasm for the organization, but the interest in the subject matter. What I did, and I figure I'll give a little bit of an introduction because it will help to put some of what we talk about as we walk around into context. 480 some odd works would not have fit on the walls of this space. And while I was very conscious of my role as juror, it was hard to step out of my life and experience as curator. So it was thinking about the individual works, but also thinking about, as I went through the selections, how I thought perhaps things would look together as a whole. And that did influence, in part, the decision-making. What I did is I went through the submissions a couple of times just to familiarize myself with the works before determining whether to select or not, and certainly before determining the award recognition or not. Based on the sort of spoil of riches, so many works and so many works of a very high quality, the show could have gone in a number of different directions. There certainly were more than enough works of, say, for example, birds and flowers of and mostly two-dimensional works of birds and flowers of a very high caliber to have filled this space at least once, if not arguably 2 times over. And I did think, those are very popular subjects in popular media, either on canvas or on paper, and that would absolutely meet the criteria. But what struck me as I kept going through was the variety of work, both in media and the variety in terms of interpretation of the subject matter, the theme. It was sort of beautifully pitched because it had a little bit of a direction, but it was open enough and general enough for, in a sense, for it to be left to the artist to interpret what flora and fauna, the relationship between the two and the relationship to us might have meant. So I did go through and I made my selections based on what I deemed to be the merits of the individual works, but I also was thinking about how those works might fit together. And out of that sort of indirectly emerges a direction. It's kind of a natural part of the process. And I was excited when I came in, when I first saw the show in space. The team did a great job in putting it up. It looks wonderful. Was to see that the variety that so struck me when I was looking at the works in presentation form translated really nicely into the space. Certainly there's continuity in terms of color and the vibrancy of color, but there's a really nice mix in terms of media, in terms of size, and in terms of interpretation of the works. So the actual award designation, I will admit, was a little bit of a challenge because as I get older, I joked about being of the type that kind of everybody gets a trophy. Not because I'm adverse to any sort of conflict, and not that conflict is a factor at all, but just wanted everyone to feel as if their works merited inclusion in the show. And that also extends to some of those that did not make the final cut. Again, this show could have been developed 2 or 3 times over with the works that were submitted. And there were any number, again, of directions that one could have gone in as far as the award designation, but I came back to what my sort of thinking and rationale was with the selection as a whole, and figured that the award winners should individually and as a group reflect the show itself, and that they should kind of be an illustration for, or a kind of microcosm of the overall experience of all the works on display. So with this one, the 3rd place winner, I was really struck by this in the first time that I saw it. This was on a PowerPoint presentation, and was increasingly struck by it every time I went around the room. And what I enjoyed about it, the work, in and out of this context, was the idea of it, the composition of it, but also how effectively landscape and a sense of space is communicated through the use of relatively simple shapes and simple materials. I found it to be a pretty compelling piece, found it to be a dynamic piece, and I thought it was a nice illustration of the ability of the artists across the show to interpret the subject, the theme, in at times unconventional ways. Sort of, it wasn't necessarily a literal interpretation of nature as we see it, but I thought it did a beautiful job of communicating a sense of nature, and in this case, landscape. I was thinking a little bit about, again, the way in which the natural world is represented in different forms across the different works. And it kept, a sense sort of speaking to me as I went around. And in the end, felt that it should be acknowledged as one of the top 3 works in the show.
And I'll give David credit. He was here for what, an hour and a half picking out the award winners?
And again, there are so many works of tremendous quality and artistry that are represented here. Could have gone in different directions, but I was thinking individually about works that I thought merited recognition, but also thinking in a sense about how the award winners as a group reflected the show as a whole.
Any thoughts on this work? It's tissue paper on panel.
Is the artist here?
She is not here. She's in Connecticut. But she'll be back in November. All right. Comments? Well, we can move on to the next piece over here.
So this piece, I thought, warranted recognition as an honorable mention. I really enjoyed this piece. It's joyful, not too many things in life anymore are. I thought actually it's very skillfully executed. I thought the idea was fun. And again, one not only that struck me when I was doing the initial review, but as I was walking around, it's a piece that draws attention. It's not one that one would be likely to ignore or pass by. And I thought it did a wonderful job. I thought it was, again, worthy of merit in its own right, but I thought it was also a nice illustration of the variety of approaches that people brought to the subject matter. And again, one that as I went around continued to sort of draw my attention as I went through the space. I don't know how practical it would be to wear.
Yeah, that was my question. Was it wearable?
Yes, it's probably going to be a little stiff, and you have to stand pretty much.
I don't think it has a back.
No.
Well,
so either that or continue to be pressed up against the wall. So, yes, absolutely. Wallflower. Other questions or comments?
Well, I think it's really interesting that this piece is pretty close to our next honorable mention, which is also pretty unconventional material over here.
Yes, there are two works by the same artist in the show, and they're wonderful sort of counterpoints in space. Both works I enjoyed very much. Both struck me. I again was really drawn to the joyfulness of the work, the simplicity of the idea, but also then and I mean that in the best possible way, also the care in its execution. That was definitely something that I was struck by, really with the works all the way around the gallery, but frequently I encounter as I go about life good ideas that sort of fall short in their execution. And when you do what I do and you're attentive to the things that I am every day, details matter. I would say arguably they do for all of us. And this is just very carefully and lovingly crafted. And I thought it is, again, one that continued to draw my eye. Both works did, but this one in particular, I thought the color combination really worked beautifully. And as I mentioned before, I thought individually as a work, it absolutely was worthy of recognition as an honorable mention. But I thought, and I didn't go in any kind of sequence, but that as we sort of walk through the space, a picture emerges a little bit in the pieces that are recognized of the character of the show as a whole, or at least as I saw it in that initial review. Questions or comments?
So may I ask, did you find it hard to pick between the two? I know you mentioned you really like this color combination.
I felt on one level that either one could have been recognized. This one just simply resonated with me. I think it was not necessarily size, although I thought compositionally the kind of gentle bend in this gave it a little more movement than the other piece has, but it was really the color combinations, I think. And it may well also have been sort of placement. It's just, again, a piece that draws the eye as you walk through the space.
Does 2D versus 3D have any more appeal to you?
Not necessarily. It was something that I noticed with the submissions as a whole. And again, as I mentioned at the start, this show, because of the number of works and the quality of work, and based on the limitations of the number that were going to make it into the space, it could have been shaped any number of different ways. What I really enjoyed most, and I think attracted me by the final selections as a group, was the variety in just about every respect. So when it came to the award designations, I was mindful, again, of being conscious of media and form in the overall selection process, and then figured that that should be reflected, and felt absolutely that the individual works that we're looking at, both in and of themselves, but also as representatives of the show, merited recognition. So media was a factor because I thought it was a factor in the show as a whole, but it wasn't necessarily the determining one in any one case. It was just something I was mindful of as I went about both the task of jurying, but also I think about exhibitions as experiences. That's how I approach them in terms of the development of an idea, and it's how I guess I reflect on them as I walk through the galleries myself.
Awesome. All right, so our next piece is also a very fun material. It's going to be our second place winner, which is the quilt over there.
Yes, I really enjoyed this piece. Again, it was one as I walked around that continued to draw my eye each time I passed the space. I thought, I mean, media was a consideration because you can't get away from the fact that it is what it is. It's an essential ingredient in the end result. But I thought compositionally it was very strong, and I loved the depth and sort of layering to it. Obviously, the white works sort of pop, and the background recedes, but you have the layers of sort of recession into depth as the greens go from lighter to dark. And then I loved the stitch work, adding another sort of layer to the piece and a kind of vitality to it. It's one that you can appreciate from the middle of the room, and it's one that you can appreciate equally, albeit maybe differently, by getting right up next to it and looking at all the lines and swirls and all the craft that goes into this piece as a work of art. And I emphasize craft in the best possible.
I have a question for you. When you're judging, are you, I know as applicants, we put down the size, but do you check that particularly? Because there's such a difference between seeing this at this size and seeing something that is that size.
No, absolutely. Both when reviewing the initial submissions, I tried to get as much of a sense of scale as possible, but I wasn't in the selection for inclusion in the show. That wasn't a determining factor. I don't know that I would say it was a determining factor in the selections of the award winners, but it's definitely an element of the work that one reckons with in the space. In the case of this piece, I remember distinctly being struck by it as I was looking at it, you know, this big on my screen. And I look at a lot of images all day, every day, and at least at this point, I've developed the ability to kind of take a mental note with certain things. And I would say I was interested to see every work in the flesh, because whether it's large or small, whether it's you know, sits proud on the wall or projects out in 3 dimensions, those factors are always going to influence the experience of the work in the space. And as does placement. And I wasn't directly involved in placement, but thought that the show was beautifully hung and really did justice, which is what one is always after, to the works individually, and holds together beautifully as an experience. It's a really pleasant, I guess experience is the best way to describe it, as you walk around, and a consistent one, I think, as you walk around the spaces.
I have a question. When you're reviewing your work, the digital submissions, you probably, you know, some really struck, you know, got your attention, others didn't. When you looked at them in person, did your views change? Were some worth more merit or some worth less in actually seeing the pieces in person?
It is fundamentally a different experience, for sure. And that's true not just in terms of jurying this show, but in terms any sort of work like this, I have to communicate with colleagues, for example, by putting this together with little thumbnails. It is not the same thing as what we're ultimately going to be putting in the galleries over at the gardens or at other places that I work. But it is a tool to get you where you want to go, and certainly the initial presentation was the way, and a very successful and productive way of reviewing nearly 500 works. I don't know if this is the answer to the question, but nothing was lesser in my mind when I was in the space than when I saw it. They are all enhanced by the experience, which is why I think it's so important that institutions like this exist and that people keep going to see them, because the virtual experience, while it serves a multiplicity of purposes, is not the same thing as standing there in the room. There are instances, and I find this, in every aspect of my work. I also, as a collector, sometimes I will have a mental image of something that I might be buying online, and then it arrives and it's like, oh, that's bigger than I thought it was, or actually, for what I spent, that's smaller than I thought. But it's never a retrograde step. It's never diminished in any way. It just sometimes it's perfectly in line with the sort of sense of what the piece is going to be like in space, and sometimes it surprises you, but usually the best possible thing.
Any other thoughts for our quilt here? All right, so our first merit award is right over here. It's this drawing, or I guess it's a watercolor.
So, unsurprisingly, for a show on this theme, I expected, and the artists delivered beautifully, work that touched on the tradition of botanical illustration. It has such a long and rich history. It seemed almost impossible that it wouldn't factor in some way in a show on the subject of flora and fauna. And that is a subject that is of interest to me, not only in my curatorial role. As an example, the Gardens has 500 rare book volumes, all filled with botanical illustrations, and then about 2,500 to 3,000 newsprints, and we use them for shows. I've worked with other collections in the past, and it's a subject of interest. I also teach a course on the art of natural history at New College, and we talk about scientific illustration, botanical illustration, etc. In the Merit Awards, my interpretation of that, and Christine was very helpful with this, was, and how it might differ from, say, an honorable mention, was that the characteristic that sort of rose to the forefront was the technical skill in its execution. And which isn't to diminish in any way the sort of composition or the choice of subject matter, the artistry in the execution, but that I thought that the two works were beautiful representations of not necessarily a type, but an approach. And in this case, this differs in some respects from a traditional botanical illustration used for scientific purposes, but it is definitely mindful of that tradition and sort of captures the best of it. There is that botanical accuracy, is at the root of scientific illustration, and botanical illustration for scientific purposes is plant identification. So being able to actually pick the plant out, that partly informs the isolation on a solid background. But yet the best botanical illustration goes beyond that. And there are compositional elements, and there are all the choices that go into the representation of the work as a work of art. So the representation of depth, I thought in this instance, the interesting mix, which is really how one experiences this plant out in the garden. Very rare that you would see it perfectly fresh and in bloom. You see some of the earlier blossoms begin to wilt as their successors sort of come to the fore. So I thought compositionally was very strong. Technically, it's quite exquisite, but the balance of the technical skill and the tradition that represents, but also the sort of compositional, it fits beautifully on the page and doesn't really need anything more, which is ultimately what one looks for with this type of work. And I thought that this was a wonderful kind of torchbearer for a whole tradition of illustration. There are a number of very fine examples, and there were others as well that people submitted, but I thought this one was the one that spoke to me when it came to awarding the Merit Award. Questions or comments?
It's also quite beautifully framed.
Yep. Yes, simple is often best. You get quality material, quality execution, simple concept.
So we do have a Susan on the Zoom, but I don't know if it's this Susan.
That would be me. That's my thing.
Oh, do you want to talk about it?
I'm a botanical illustrator, and I love the detail of the work. And this plant, I've seen growing since I've been in Sarasota, and I've always wanted to paint it. Mm-hmm. And my neighbor happened to have them growing, so I was able to. I like to work from live specimens, but I take many, many photographs because live specimens change hour by hour.
They do.
So I do the live specimen for color and shape and the posture of the plant, how it grows, and then the actual painting. I do like my photographs.
Yeah, it's beautifully done.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Okay, so I believe we're all the way around the next corner for our next work. Not sure which one it is. Oh, yes, sweet, yes. Right there. And we have the artist for that here as well.
So another honorable mention is this wonderful and very dapper elephant. And another piece that as I went around, and I mean, certainly from first seeing it in an image in the original selections to seeing it in the flesh was one that struck me. For a couple of reasons. Certain pieces have a presence. I thought that this one did. And in a very real sense, it has a personality. And that, I think, is an important term because in addition to venturing into different media here, I do have an interest in ceramics. It also is a very different interpretation of nature in that it's nature anthropomorphized, which is nature as we rarely experience it in life, because it's not often that the plants and animals that surround us don tweed coats and engage us directly in conversation. But it is a big part of our lifelong experience of nature, and certainly a big part of our early interactions with nature in childhood. It's actually something that I touch on with my students in my course, the many, many connections between natural history and children's literature. And many of the sort of great works are works that carry with us throughout our lives. They become sort of cultural phenomena. They're not just the stories that we have fond memories of. They're the stories that sort of shape generation after generation and ignite a sense of curiosity. And I thought that this piece, while rather small for an elephant, had a lot of presence, and also, again, going back to that, what I mentioned in the start of wanting to not only recognize works that I thought individually were worthy of recognition, but thinking about the award winners as a group, making sure that that group, in my mind, stood as representatives of the exhibition as a whole. And while some of these individual pieces are unique, there really isn't anything else like it in the show, I thought that was worthy in its own way of recognition, but that as a group, they still, maybe in different ways, represent the spirit of the exhibition as a whole. Any questions or comments?
You want to say anything, Linda? No.
Oh, you know artists? No. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were
Getting my artist confused here.
And the arms move, which is
the
great.
Arms and legs move. Yes, it's adorable.
But again, a tremendous amount of attention to detail in the execution of it. Again, a relatively simple is not the right word, but a relatively kind of true and straightforward concept, beautifully executed, and just, I thought, a lot of fun.
All right. So we have our next and last honorable mention over here.
Yes, there were a number of works by this artist that were submitted, and I really enjoyed them all. This was one in the initial selection that sort of struck me, and I kept coming back to it when it came to recognition in the form of an honorable mention. What is interesting, but also not surprising, is that we tend to, when it comes time to dedicating time, energy, and our sort of creative spirit to capturing nature on paper or on canvas, we tend to selectively leave certain things out, like the above ground water pipes. But sort of like with the elephant and that sense of the kind of nature created as a character that informs our childhood, I think, not just in my case, but I think for many of us, this is how we regularly encounter nature as we're walking around. And I thought there was something very Floridian about this, the palm tree in the background, the airplane in the distance, and the bird just sort of going about its day on the above ground pipe for access purposes. I thought that the color, the kind of mix of colors, the sculptural quality of the elements, it just seemed right and true and kind of nature as experienced in the everyday. Particularly if you're looking for it, because very likely if it's similar to the other birds one encounters, it's probably standing there perfectly still and you would easily walk past it. But if you do, you miss an encounter with an extraordinary thing. So I liked the fact that this interpreted the theme a little bit differently, did so with a very high level of execution, with what I took to be a little bit of a sense of humor, but touched on encounters with nature as we're likely to experience them every day.
Thoughts?
Love it. So the medium on this is that digital drawing, not photography, right?
I believe so.
Yes. It's like a digital painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Until you mentioned the airplane, I've never seen it before.
Yes, I've looked at it a couple of times.
I've looked at it for many minutes.
Yep. And again, that I love the little detail because you know, as you go about your day, if you snap pictures of things and you go back and look at them, and you look at anything other than the subject that you were trying to focus, you're going to get life playing out in the background. And frequently, our representations of sky have rather angular formations in the background that are not natural, but man-made.
I think the fact that the red is so strong, well, the whole palette is strong, but the red is so strong and the bird is so small relatively.
Yeah.
And then you get, so you first you see that and the setting, and then, oh, the bird. That is such a nice surprise.
Yes. There were 3 works that I remember submitted by the artist. They were all had these sort of bright colors, but the relationship between the pipe and the bird, and then the impact of that kind of bright red mass in the middle was the one that just sort of struck me.
And the shadows.
Yeah, the shadow
it
brings it out, the detail.
Yeah. And just the sense that, yep, I've been there, I've seen this. And there's something as a non-native very Floridian about it. I grew up in the Midwest. We do not encounter bird life like that, but also our pipes don't tend to be above ground. So there's sort of structure and nature that, at least in my experience, are very specific to place.
I think there's also a commentary about our encroachment on natural.
Yeah, and that was true of all 3 works that the artist submitted. And what I appreciated was that it was there, it was clear, but it didn't seem to be passing judgment. But it was still a strong element that one could hardly miss in encountering the works.
I actually noticed that there's sort of artistic sculptures that are done in a secret manner by artists. You know, really, they're artists because no 2 are alike, and they're all different colors. I was photographing a lot of them, and I was amazed at how different they were, and how did they make those decisions to, you know, to put pipes in different places and bolts. Really, and they're all colored different. Some are pink, purple, in the strangest places. Like a lavender pipe.
Yep. See, you're all going to see them everywhere you go.
All right, so we have 2 more works on that back wall there.
So maybe we'll start with the merit.
Sure.
Well, I really liked this work. I think there were two works by the artist, both really beautifully executed. In no particular order, things that sort of struck me about this. Different in that it's, although it has a very different look and feel, it is reflective in my mind of nature as experienced, as opposed to, although this is also true in this case, nature composed. Clearly, we have framed this, the view that is represented, whether real or imaginary, is very carefully selected. But I spend a good portion of my time outside, particularly at, for example, Selby Spanish Point campus, and this is a very familiar scene. It's beautiful in life, and it's beautifully translated on canvas here, or on panel here, I should say. I stylistically really enjoyed the balance between the kind of quick and somewhat aggressive lines with the careful sort of control and handling of the material. Not always easy to do. And it was another piece that, like the illustration, I thought beautifully represented another approach to representing the natural world, more a sort of conventional landscape than, say, for example, the second place winner, but yet reflective of a tradition, and was a nice representative of a way of framing nature that a number of the works in the show represent. I thought, again, in terms of merit, just the choice of subject, the careful choice of composition, the beautiful execution, all sort of came together to make this exemplary. And that is why I selected it. But thought that it also, like the illustration, was a sort of torchbearer for I don't want to say a type of art, but an approach to representing the natural world.
Knowing the artist, I'm pretty sure he did this plein air, wherever that was. He often starts with the red background to get those kind of pops in there.
Back to the question about the difference between seeing it on screen and seeing it in person. The image translates, the depth of the image does not. So this is definitely one where, while it is a two-dimensional image, because you're talking about paint applied to canvas, and there are different tools potentially used, different brushes, possibly even a palette knife, there results a kind of tactility to it that you don't get when you're seeing a photograph of it. And I thought that it was the perfect sort of enhancement of the subject matter. It was just very, very nicely and very skillfully represented.
I think it's very interesting that it's a kind of image we see all the time. Just walk by, and he stopped and made it so special.
Yeah.
That the art does that. A photograph wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. Yes, it would have been. I don't think as compelling as a photograph. And yeah, it's finding the beauty and the artistry in nature a little less composed, which it doesn't make it better, it just makes it different. And what I loved as you walk around is you do have what are likely to be plants and animals as we have seen them. You have plants and animals as we remember them and reinterpret them. And you have kind of wild nature and you have composed nature. Although again, there is still composition that goes into it, what you see and of course what you don't. But I thought that this was sort of at the intersection of a number of points that captured the essence of the show as a whole.
Yeah. I think it shows the power of artists. They have a certain power that it's almost as if this whole show is life. All these different artists putting everything into what they do and sacrificing immensely to create something like that. That's way better than any photograph. It's really special.
And I think you've articulated it beautifully. And to me, what's interesting is I think your exact statement could apply to the piece we were just looking at. You would just as easily walk past, the pipe with the bird that probably is standing there motionless, and certainly not necessarily look at it and think, yes, this is worthy of capturing in an illustrated form and putting on the walls of the gallery, but yet it does so very successsually.
I'm gonna look up and see if it's a group of people who really see themselves as artists doing all these pipes.
Could be. Certainly, if one wanted to kind of go rogue and paint one under the cover of darkness, you definitely could have all kinds of fun with that, for sure. Good questions or comments?
All right, well, last but not least, we have our first place winner here, the tiniest work in the show.
Yes. So back to that idea of size, the fact that it was the tiniest was not a determining factor, but the what was which I think maybe size is an ingredient in this is presence, and I thought that this work, while it has many merits, it definitely had a presence that was very, very strong. It did in the presentation when I was looking through the slides. And I think in that instance, it was maybe more the high level of execution in the work, that coupled with the choice of color. I think the choice of color is very, very strong and very complementary. What I loved about it which I didn't really anticipate, was the three-dimensional aspect of it in life. It has depth. It's probably an inch or more deep. The image goes around the side. It becomes fundamentally a different thing, and I think it becomes infinitely more engaging as you experience it as you walk past it, as opposed to just simply walking up to it. And it was definitely one, and I've mentioned this with a number of pieces, that as I kept going around, it's hard to dismiss. It draws attention. And then when you're paying attention to it, what you see is beautiful choice of color, strong composition, very high level of technical skill. It was sort of a microcosm of a lot of what we talked about with all the other works in the show as a whole, all in one neat, tiny, and very beautiful package.
Yeah, I have to say it was very unexpected to get first prize. You know, I thought I might get a mention, but the tiniest piece of the show. It's actually from a visit I used to have in California, because they weren't running everywhere like out here. So I actually had a terrarium, and Big Green was one of the nobles that I had.
I showed, I took pictures, which as I was walking around when I was helping, to help me as I was making the selections, and I still had them on the phone, and I was showing some colleagues, and it's one of the joys, but it also always makes me laugh, and working with plant scientists is like they went right in on the species as they did with some of the other things, and it's like, yep, but take a step back and look at it. And it's part of the the joy in my role at the Gardens is working in a kind of interdisciplinary team and coming at whatever it is we're trying to tackle from all those different perspectives. But yeah, in this instance, the choice of subject, and at least in this part of the world anymore, the uniqueness of the treasure that is the green anole is really beautifully captured here.
I also think that that beautiful stem that's just slightly off the middle is just beautiful. Yeah. It's sort of the basic principles of art, how you balance a picture. And there it is, in just a little inch stem.
And Big Green sounds better than Big Brown.
Well, he was the Big Green and Little Leaf. He had a little female.
Yep, perfect.
Maybe because you knew him too. The piece is very engaging, and there's always that. It's very personal. I'm not surprised to find out you knew this later.
Oh, certainly with the elephant, for example, we dressed him up, so it sort of screams personality because that's what we've done. But this does, it's an interesting mix of being true to the subject. I mean, it's immediately recognizable, but yet, and it may be because while it's a small work, it is an enlargement of the subject. There's personality to it, or maybe character more than personality might be the better word to use. And that's a mix of attributes that are not always easy to find together in one piece.
Makes me want to know what he's thinking.
Yes. When are we done? We've been at this for hours. When can I take a break? He was a good subject.
Well, congratulations, Jen.
Thank you for submitting it.
Well, any other thoughts for Dr. Berry while we're here?
I have a question.
Please.
The screen speaks.
I'm wondering if Selby Gardens will ever have a demonstration, an exhibit of local painters. You have photographers all the time and you have the highwaymen, but what about local living current artists?
It's certainly within the realm of possibility. We do have our juried photographic show. That is a sort of anchor to our calendar, much anticipated every year. I think it's definitely a possibility, but I'm also mindful as I'm standing in this space that some of our partnering organizations in town do a brilliant job of creating those kinds of opportunities, and want to make sure that we're working in parallel as opposed to in competition. But I do think, and it is something, not just making local connections, but being mindful of the arts in Florida more broadly is something that should be a part of our program. And I think there's space for it in any arts program in the area. There's a lot of good work. There's a lot of captivating subject matter. It's just a matter of finding the right combination at the right time, and it'll happen.
Okay, well, as a former member of Art Uptown Gallery, which sadly closed, I still meet with the former artists monthly, and we've discussed this a few times, and I can tell you you'd have a lot of local living artists who care a lot about Selby Gardens and work to promote that love during controversies recently during their expansion. And we'd love to show our love, with art.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Marlene. All right, well, while we're at it, I'm going to do a quick shout out. Our juror for our next show, Euphoria, is in the building, Leslie Butterfield.
Several this year, but thank you very much for the good job you've done today, and expressing why you've chosen what you have. And I think talking about what it means when you're looking at 482, whatever it was, tiny images, and you don't have very much information. Well, you have the image, but it's not very big. So it's a tough thing. So I'm very much looking forward to it. I hope you'll all submit.
Yes, the deadline is Sunday, September 15th.
You take bribes. Right, no, but talking to Christina about
compelling work.
What's the theme?
Euphoria. Trying to keep it light.
So try to interpret that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Berry.
Thank you.